Another Central European election and more allegations of Russian interference. This time it's Czechia, and the result could be a massive headache for the European Union. Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, general elections in Czechia, which is also known as the Czech Republic, don't usually make the headlines across Europe. But this week's vote is different. Andrej Babis, who lost power in a surprise defeat in 2021, is hoping to make a comeback as Prime Minister. He calls himself a Trumpist and, if successful, will join neighbours in Hungary and Slovakia in being Europe's troublemakers.
Andrej Babis. He's the Czech billionaire, former Prime Minister and more recently a presidential candidate. This weekend he's hoping to win parliamentary elections again. His ANO party, which stands for the movement of dissatisfied citizens, is leading the polls. And if he becomes Prime Minister again, it will be the European Union that will be most dissatisfied.
The ANO movement knows and has experienced that EU membership is primarily a fight for the interests of Czech citizens and the Czech Republic, and a defence against nonsense and regulations coming from Brussels.
Czechia is part of the Visegrad bloc within the EU, along with Poland, Slovakia and Hungary. And like Viktor Orban and Robert Fico, Babis is against Europe's liberal migration policies and aligns himself with Donald Trump. Most worrying for the continent's elite, he's also against unconditional support for the war in neighbouring Ukraine.
We will not deliver weapons to Ukraine. If they have them, that's another matter.
All this has led to concerns of a Eurosceptic formation in the heart of Europe. Whatever the result this weekend, Czechia is the latest example of a backlash against the EU's policies and the growth in support for right-wing populists.
Well, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from the Czech city of Brno is Tomas Cirhan. He is Assistant Professor of International Relations and European Studies. That's at Masaryk University. In Sussex, in the UK, we have Sean Hanley, Associate Professor in Slavonic and Eastern European Studies at University College London. And in London, I'm delighted to welcome the seasoned foreign correspondent, Mary Dejevsky. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. Thomas, to you first. Talk about an awkward squad. If the opposition wins this, it will mean that we have three countries at the heart of Europe, at the heart of the European Union, whose views may not really align with Brussels. It would be Slovakia, Hungary and Czechia. That's if Andrej Babis wins this election. How big a problem do you think this might be for the European Union?
Hi, Darren. Thank you for having me. I think we might see some shift when Andrej Babis, if he wins the election and if he forms a government. That's another if, because it will be quite difficult for him to do it, considering his coalition potential and other aspects. But I think he will be more pragmatic in terms of his cooperation or his position on the EU and especially on Ukraine. I think he will try to focus more on the domestic and especially economic issues. And I think he will try to not put as much emphasis on Ukraine, on supporting with firearms, with ammunition, as his predecessor did in the government.
Mary, just come in on that. How big a problem do you think an opposition victory in Czechia will be for the European Union if it happens?
I think it could be quite a big problem because, as you say, you've got a trio of countries that will represent something rather different from the mainstream and official EU policy, especially towards Ukraine. I think that, I understand that if Babis wins, then he'll probably be in coalition and his room for manoeuvre could be constrained. But I still think that it is quite a problem. Also, additionally, because France and Germany currently are quite weak in terms of their position inside the EU. So the idea that you would have a really strong position that could, as it were, override that trio of countries, that may be more difficult now.
Sean, to you. So if the opposition win this in Czechia, a government led by the ANO party, they would probably clash with the European Union on migration, climate, Ukraine, possibly move closer to Viktor Orban's Hungary. All of this would be a headache for the European Union.
It would be, but I think it would actually be less of a headache than people might think. I think Andrej Babis is, as Tomas has suggested, is a very transactional politician and one who's very, very focused on domestic issues, power in the Czech Republic, Czech economy. And his positions in terms of Europe are not particularly worked out. I mean, the Czech Republic has been an awkward partner in the past when it was led by Václav Klaus a while back. So awkward Czechs in the EU is not a new story. And my feeling is that Babis is a businessman and he's prepared to do deals. And I think his positioning in terms of pushing against the mainstream, Ukraine, Green Deal as well, migration, he will just trade this off against other things that he wants. I don't think we're going to see Andrej Babis shoulder to shoulder with Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin. So the optics don't look good, but I think the reality is that we have someone who is a ruthless pragmatist rather than an ideological populist.
Thomas, tell us a bit more about Andrej Babis. What do we need to know about him? He is on the record as saying, I am a Trumpist.
I think he changed his position on Donald Trump slightly since we have seen his second term in American politics. But what we can say about Andrej Babis, as Sean mentioned, so he's a pragmatic businessman. He's one of the richest Czechs. He has made it into politics in 2013 with his party, and since then he has been one of the most important figures in the Czech party system. So, the way how he functions is that he uses a lot of experts on political marketing and on polls, so he will know exactly what his domestic audience, what his potential voters want to hear, and then he will basically adjust the way how he speaks and the way he speaks about different topics in order to tailor it in what his voters want to hear. So he's a little bit unpredictable in this way, so it will depend a lot on the sentiments that we can see in Czech society. He's very flexible and he's not a particularly ideological person. So anything he will want to say will depend on what he thinks his audience and his voters want to hear.
Mary, talking about what voters want to hear, Babis is pledging to raise salaries, lower energy prices and reduce corporate taxes. This plays out very well domestically.
Absolutely, but I don't know how much room he'll actually be able to have to do all that. Energy prices, in particular, is going to be quite a big issue across Europe, and it's not clear how much leeway he would have to provide cheaper energy prices for Czechia. I'd just like to add one thing to the previous question about the trio of countries that could produce a sort of awkward squad in that part of Europe. There's a very, very interesting possibility that even if Czechia elects Babis, that the one person who's become the sort of figurehead of that sort of thinking in that part of Europe, Viktor Orban, could actually be beaten in an election next April. So, we could be looking at 2 out of the 3 rather than 3 out of the 3 in the longer term.
Thanks, Mary. Sean, to you, just on that point about Babis, he talks a very good game. He's, as we now know, the richest Czech, a very, very successful man. Talk to me about Ukraine. He wants to end ammunition supplies for Ukraine, and he's also against NATO's 5% spending pledge on defence. So he has some questionable policies there, has he?
Yes, he does. But you with Babis, you have to sort of look at the rhetoric and then you have to look at the reality. So he has He says he will abolish the Czech munitions initiative, which has been pioneered by the current Czech president, supported by the current government, where the Czech Republic is coordinating the purchase of munitions for Ukraine. And he says, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to concentrate on our own people, which is a message which plays very well to his voters and keeps more radical voters on side, because he's under pressure from radical parties on the right and on the left, while at the same time saying, well, this is something which NATO should more properly do. So leaving some wiggle room for this initiative to simply be shunted off without the Czech Republic being quite so high profile. On spending, yes, it's true. He says Czechs don't need to spend. I don't think it's NATO per se, but it's Czechs, because he's very focused on the Czech Republic. And he says, no, we're not going to spend 5% or even attempt to do so. We'll stick to 2%. And that's the way it's going to be. To focus on domestic priorities, I mean, the spending package, the promises he's made do seem to be undeliverable. It's not clear where the money is going to come from. Not boosting defence spending might be one way of finding resources, but he's going to certainly not be able to deliver anything like what he is promising. So again, with Babis, you at first sight you see an Orban-style populist. Take a closer look, and there's something slightly different. As Tomas has suggested, he's an absolute political shapeshifter.
To you, Thomas, just on that point then, how big a deal is Ukraine in this election for the Czech people? Is it a daily talking point, or are there other domestic issues like cost of living and energy that are far greater importance?
I think these things are connected, because we host the large population of Ukrainian refugees in the Czech Republic, and also the public sentiment is changing in a way that, because it has been taken a long time, the war, and also it's not easy to accommodate so many people in a country of only 10 million. So it's like over 500,000 of refugees from Ukraine that are living in the Czech Republic. So it is a daily conversation. You can also see that the negative anti-Ukrainian sentiments are growing. You can see this on the social media. You can also hear this in public. And I think the marketers of ANO are also aware of this. So that's why Babis is trying to misuse these sentiments as well to build. It's not as strongly anti-Ukrainian as, for example, the SPD of Tomio Okamura, but it is in that direction. So I think it's the domestic economic issues are more important, but also you can see that they are somehow connected. So you can see the stagnating wages are also connected to the large influx of people who can work for lower wages. For example, you can see this on the housing as well, because there is more pressure on the rental sector. So the rents are going up higher than they would have been if there would not be another 500,000 people that need shelter. So these things are connected, I would say.
Mary, to you, are there concerns with this election about misinformation allegedly being driven by Russia into the Czech public, what people are seeing online and reading? Are these serious concerns, do you think?
You're probably speaking to the wrong person to get a particular answer there, because I'm very, very skeptical about the actual impact of messaging, whether it comes from Russia or from any other would-be actors in other people's election, because I think, people measure bots and hits and all sorts of things. And, it sounds like millions and millions of all these things happening at the same time. But actually, when you try to gauge the impact is much, much less than any of that would suggest. So I think maybe we've got another election going on at roughly the same time in Moldova. And Moldova is, of course, closer to Russia, and I think there's probably much more proven use of disinformation in Moldova. In Czechia, I think to an extent, though Thomas will probably know better than I do, but I don't think it's come to the point where there's any suggestion that it's going to swing the election.
Come in on that, Sean. Are you concerned about misinformation in the Czech kind of sphere?
I think politics has changed. It's changed everywhere, and including the Czech Republic. And that, whereas once you might have built a party with a grassroots organization, these days you might build a social media network. And it's clear from pro and anti-Ukraine protests, anti-COVID movements that this type of messaging does matter and I think does have an effect. And I think it's quite interesting to see how some of the sort of parties and movements that emerged during the anti-COVID process and from let's call it the alternative media scene, have emerged on the lists of some political groupings. For example, there's on the communist-led ANO bloc has some of these people, as does the far right. I don't think necessarily, though, it's all kind of orchestrated from Moscow. I think that money does count, but I think the messaging and the politics are entirely sort of Czech-made.
Thomas, to you, talk to me about the sitting Prime Minister, then the incumbent Petr Fiala. Critics say he does very well on foreign policy, less so on domestic issues. Is that fair criticism, do you think?
It's not fair completely. I would say that the government has been focusing on, but that makes sense considering what was happening. They formed the government just 2 weeks when the war in Ukraine started. So there has been the biggest focus. They also were leading the EU at the time, so they had the EU presidency. They have been focusing on foreign policy a lot, but this is basically part of the ANO's campaign to also show that they don't care about Czech people. It's all about Ukraine, and I think it's part of the message that Andrej Babis is trying to spread about the Czech Prime Minister. And it's also not completely fair because they have been focusing, of course, on the economy, but the issues that we are seeing now with the growing uncertainty on global markets, especially with the German economy that Czech economy is to some degree dependent on, there is only so much that you can do as a Czech Prime Minister. You cannot influence everything. And also the energy prices that have been skyrocketing since the war started, that has a lot to do with the past. So, we have been depending on Russian energy sector for years. We had one of the highest dependency rates on Russian gas, for example, also in terms of electricity. We don't the politicians in Czech Republic can only do as much. They cannot influence everything 100%. And of course, the ANO party and its marketing experts, they know this. So this is the weak point of the government, and they are using this in the campaign now.
Mary, some of the criticism I've read online of Petr Fiala, people saying that he doesn't kind of get the average person. He always wears a suit. He looks impeccably dressed. What do Czech people expect of their leaders? I mean, the UK had Boris Johnson here for 3 years, and you could never accuse him of rocking a suit. Fiala looks the part.
Well, exactly. And I think maybe there is, I would say that there is maybe a tendency to a little more formality in Czechia than there would be in some countries. But countries have very different perspectives on what's appropriate for their leader. You think about Macron in France, there is a very clear sort of image of how a president ought to look and how a president ought to behave. So I think Boris Johnson was definitely a one-off. But I think, going back to the question of information and particularly social media, I think the ability to present yourself, suit or no suit, directly to people. This is something that Donald Trump is so brilliant at. And it's something that today's politicians really have had to learn, and you watch them actually trying to talk to people directly in what they think is the language they can understand. And of course, when you look at the UK, you've got an example of a prime minister, a lot of people will say, who again has done very well on the international stage, but in terms of talking to ordinary people, that has been a big, big problem for the whole of the year that Labour's been in power.
Sean, just come in on that point then. Do you think Petr Fiala has a communications problem at the heart of his government?
Well, yes and no, at several levels. I mean, he has a communication problem in the sense that he needs to communicate more than that he's going to save Czech democracy. I think there's been a lack of, on both sides in Czech politics, there's a lack of any kind of clear vision about where the country wants to go, and also there's been no effective messaging on the economy. These are Petr Fiala and his kind of coalition are a group of right-wing parties. They are not, on the whole, they're not all strongly pro-free market. There are some social elements, there's some Christian Democrats, but on the whole, they really haven't managed to engage with these economic issues and been able to put across a vision of how they want the country to develop and how they will deal with the issues that many ordinary Czechs feel who are kind of under pressure economically. And Fiala was perfect for an earlier period. He was a serious, sensible, understated politician without any personal or financial scandals. And he was kind of authentic. He is like that. Other Czech politicians like Babis, Babis wears a hoodie and a tracksuit, and his style of communication is very Trumpian. So there's space for all of these things, and I think Fiala his problems are political. They're not. Then I mean, communication could be better. He might have more charisma, but I don't think it's him particularly. I think he's actually performing as well as he can, given his background and given his limitations. And I think the reason it's not popular are political and economic.
Thank you, Sean. Thomas, to you, just tell me, where does your country see itself going in the next few years then? Because you've proudly been such a strong member of the European Union, basically at the very heart of the European project. And now an opposition leader, a potential new prime minister in Babis, who perhaps does not align to everything the European Union wants to do. This is a big moment for the Czech people.
That's a good question. I think it would depend who we would ask from the Czech society as well. I mean, there has always been a certain segment of the society that was Eurosceptic. I think after the UK, the Czech population has been the most Eurosceptic from all the member countries. So there has always been, and this goes back to Václav Klaus from the 90s, that there has always been some, mistrust in the EU and in the European project. I think some of the politicians are still trying to build on this distrust and trying to misuse it, utilize it in their campaigns. And I mean, where do we see the Czech Republic in 5 years? That's a good question. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, of course, to see the future, to be able to tell you. But I think the issue is that many people don't feel like they are economically well off and they are benefiting enough from this, from their membership in the EU. Of course, when you have the people that speak the languages, they know how to use the modern technology, that travel, that can use all the benefits of our membership in the EU, then they would be positive and they would be pro-European. But this is not the case for everybody. If you are working class manual worker, maybe from one of the regions that are not benefiting so much from this, you will see a completely different picture if you would ask them. We have huge issues with inequality between different regions. They are not as developed. Some of the regions that have been deindustrialized in the last decades, you can see a lot of issues there. So it really depends which part of the society you would be looking at. But I would say in general, the Czechs still have this pro-Western, pro-European perspective. But the issue is that the last years that we have really seen economic issues in this country that
Thanks,
are
Thomas.
difficult to comprehend.
Thank you. Mary, final point to you. Just briefly, give us a prediction. What do you think is going to happen this week?
Well, it looks as though Babis really can't be caught, and that he will then become the next prime minister, but probably at the head of a coalition. There has been some speculation, which I suspect is probably not correct, that the result could be sort of overridden by the president, who could ask somebody else to form the government. But I think Babis the result would probably have to be closer than it currently looks in the polls for that to happen.
Sean, I'll just get your prediction while we have you. Will they stick with Fiala or will the Czechs go back to Babis?
I think we'll definitely have Andrej Babis as Prime Minister, either leading a coalition or potentially leading a minority government. The Czechs have a tradition to some extent of doing minority governments.
And Tomas, Fiala or Babis?
I would say Babis as well, but as Sean mentioned, I think a lot of options are possible there. I don't think the president would intervene in such a way, and I would, if I could bet, the minority government would be the safer bet, I would say.
So it looks like it's checkmate for Petr Fiala. We will see. Time will tell. Thank you so much, Mary, Sean and Thomas. Fascinating stuff. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable, TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.